all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fausone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including RSS.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio this afternoon, Matt Smith. Now, we got him on because he's the Executive Director of Veterans Initiatives at Emory University. But long before that, he was an Army ROTC dude at Delaware, and then went on to have, I read it here somewhere, 20, 30 years in the U.S. Army and the National Guard. He was the commander of Joint Task Force North. He was the Deputy Director of Ops for Army National Guard Bureau in D.C. Long history here, Matt. Welcome to Veterans Radio.
Thank you very much for having me, Jim, and thank you for what you're doing for veterans writ large and for your own service.
Well, absolutely, Lieutenant JG, you ended up as a major general in the Army, so, a lot of gap in between.
I'm fond of pointing out that they lower the standards every year. So
yeah, there you go. There you go. And Matt has his MBA from Emory University.
Yep.
He also got his Master's of Strategic Studies from the Army War College. So as he was transitioning out of the military, somebody at Emory University said, "Do I have a job for you?" So tell us how this transition occurred for you.
Yeah, so the way I refer to this, Jim, is that my predecessor, who's a wonderful gentleman, his name is Ken Keene, also retired Army officer, regular Army guy his whole career. He's the honorary commander of the 75th Ranger Regiment, so he is a legendary figure in the infantry and certainly here in Georgia with all the Ranger presence here. And he knows I say this about him. I was his exit strategy. So I think a little bit more probably to the point is at some point I became the most senior alum of the business school. So the fact that I was an alum, the fact that I'm became a senior military officer was somewhat unicorn-like. So it was a great opportunity, and I'm sure you can appreciate a great place to land so that I can keep giving back.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about education here on Veterans Radio a little bit because, officers often have their college degree. They're maybe working on or thinking about working on their master's or their PhD as they exit. Enlisted guys, however, a very small percentage of enlisted guys have completed their degree either before service or during service. So I think it's only about 7% of enlisted personnel have a bachelor's degree. So this idea of can I make it in the education world to advance my career goals after military really becomes very important. But it's also a real struggle for guys. Um, and there are universities, you see them online, and you're in a little wonder about some of the things you see online. But then there are
Yeah.
real universities like Emory. Uh, Talk to us about that whole transition from active military or Guard and Reserve military into academics, and how an institution advances that.
Yeah. So let me just say before I answer that particular question, we are very proud that about 50% of our cohort of veterans in our program are senior enlisted guys and gals. And I think, with the exception of the only other Master of Business for Veterans program at USC in LA, there's no other schools that get even close to that percentage of enlisted leaders.
Well,
In
and I want
the,
to talk about that master's program a little
yeah.
separately because
Okay.
that's so unique. But Emory has a Veterans Association with all kinds of services and help for undergrads. So I want you to
Yep.
talk a little bit about that as the executive director of the Veteran Initiative.
Yeah. So it's funny. I've been there about a year, and I have found that across the various schools of the university, there's veteran stuff going on all over the place. And, having spent 5 years in the Pentagon, I'm very familiar with the idea of silos of excellence in an organization, right? But the Pentagon's got nothing on academia in terms of siloed organization from a school standpoint. So, like, the medical school doesn't talk to people at the business school. The business school doesn't talk to people at the school of theology, and so on. So it's been a great journey of discovery over this year to find out all the things that are going on behalf of veterans in each of the schools at the university. Um, Ostensibly, my responsibility is to try to synchronize that and or advance it collectively, which is easier said than done because of the aforementioned silos. So,
Well, it's an interesting, I think when we talk to student veteran SVA members and student
mhm.
veterans, it's real easy for a vet coming into a school to feel isolated because, these are 18-year-old kids going from high school to college. You don't fit in with those guys and
Right.
gals. So having a community and having support of a veteran community, I think is really important for somebody doing that transition going, hey, I'm going back. I've been out for 4 or 6 or 8 years and I'm going back. Is that what you find there at Emory and why you have such a robust Veterans Association?
Yeah, very much so. The fellowship, if you will, that common service creates, I think, um, produces an immediate community as veteran. Like, it may only be two, but we've all seen it. Two veterans come together. Hey, what'd you do? What service were you in? What'd you do in that service? And it just starts, you know. So we try to be deliberate about providing opportunity for that to happen. And we do that. It's that kind of idea manifested within the business school. And then back to my previous point,
Well, yeah, let's
we're
let's
look.
talk let's talk about that because that is a unique program at Emory. This focus on sort of getting veterans into the business community, but into a master's program of leadership because they've got all this background. So,
Mhm.
what's the concept there at Emory relative to this?
Yeah. So it started with USC, as I mentioned earlier. And our dean came from being a professor at USC. And he said to Ken Keene, my predecessor, I mentioned a couple minutes ago, hey, we got all these veterans around the Southeast. Emory's an excellent institution, very well regarded across the university. Why don't we start one of these programs for veterans here? And the kind of the hook or the kind of purpose of the program is to harness those decades of experience that you just alluded to, right? The average age of our students, Jim, is 40. So very different than, I was 27 and thought I had the world figured out when I was going through the MBA program. So you got, much more seasoned leaders in this cohort of all veterans. It's only in person, which is to one of your other points. It's like the camaraderie that comes with that, the immediate community is something we get a lot of positive, unsolicited feedback about. And because they're more senior, both officer and NCO, they're already generalists, right? They have spent the last several years of whatever their career arc was integrating different functional areas, ops, logistics, personnel, whatever. So the idea is, hey, we can shorten this down because we'll leave out the specialization that occurs in the second half of an MBA program, regardless of how it's delivered. And we'll just give everybody the language of business, if you will, through all the introductory courses, intro to finance, intro to marketing, intro to accounting. And then we'll harness those decades of experience in leadership and management to give them that language of business, and then we shoot them out the other end, and it seems to be pretty well regarded.
It's interesting because when you have an average age of 40, you think about those guys and gals have managed all kinds of HR issues. They've been responsible for budgets. They've been responsible for getting chewed out and chewing out. I mean, it really is it's a different cohort, isn't it?
It really is. One of the first conversations I had with our professors, I said, well, what do you like about this audience versus the other programs in the school? And she said, they're accountable to themselves, they're accountable to each other, and they're on time. So
look at that.
But see, they don't, as the saying goes, they don't suffer fools. So,
well, and again, they're coming at it with an experience of they've probably married, maybe even divorced. They probably have kids. They've probably got a mortgage. I mean, it is I would assume it's a much more serious mindset. Is that what you're hearing, General?
Very much so. Yeah. And I describe all those other things. I say there's a lot more life going on in the background outside the classroom, which of course brings its own challenges, but is also kind of aided by the fact that this program is half as long as a full, MBA program.
One of the challenges anybody has when they transition out of the military and they try to make their way back into education to get their degree and move on to whatever they want to do in life is sort of the financial piece.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how Emory University and benefits kind of all meld together to make this actually achievable and not financially unviable.
Yeah, so there's a couple aspects to that. The going in fact is that Emory's a private, not-for-profit entity, right? So it's expensive if you're walking in off the street. It is a yellow ribbon school, which I'm sure you're familiar with that program. So for those who show up with their full post 9/11 benefits intact, there is no expense. The university and the business school cover the balance. And then very sincerely, and I've said this to many people, Jim, perhaps the most heartfelt experience I've had over my year of doing this is the level of generosity from random members of our nation just to advance these veterans as they transition out into the next chapter of life. I mean, it is very impressive, the level of giving for veterans that people, who aren't veterans, and in many cases, B, aren't even alums of the university or the business school, have just been tremendously generous because there's a lot of people can get behind the idea of, hey, I want to help a veteran who helped their nation.
Well, and there's such a Americans are generous to a fault, and education is one of those things which is transformational. So you're helping somebody transform not only their life but their family's life. Um, so it's been in the news a lot lately about the Pentagons, and you brought Pentagon up, having worked there. The Pentagon's
Yes.
displeasure with certain Ivy League old schools. We could name them on the Northeast coast. Tell
Right.
me how Emory down in Georgia is received by the folks in Washington D.C. and at the Pentagon.
Well, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't happy, or I was happy we weren't on that list. And as you can imagine, I stay in touch with a bunch of my peers that are working in some of those institutions, and I certainly feel for them. Um, that whole situation's obviously indicative of the frictions within our society. I
You
almost,
can simply say Emory's in good standing, right?
yeah, we are. But and I'll tell you a quick story that goes, I think, to that point. And I almost take the opposite look at it. Like, I want more veterans in those classrooms at those universities to share to your earlier point, they're older, they've lived experiences that few people have, and maybe it helps create some diversity of thought,
Well, it's
Um,
probably not where the students are, but where the professors are, and
maybe so.
you have to
Yeah.
have academic acceptance of these kind of students.
Yes.
And you mentioned one of the professors that you were talking to and what she saw in them, and part of that is you got to have folks who are going to accept these are students who've lived life. They've probably been overseas. They probably have a different view than you may have. You got to have an academic approach that says, I'm willing to take in all of that.
Yeah. Very much so. Yeah. And
So, so there's a few things that going to toss out to you from the various questions provided to me. Um,
okay.
I'm I'm kind of interested in what your advice would be then for service members making this transition or being too afraid to make the transition. What advice would you give them?
So I'll start off by saying I refer to myself as the highest paid educational services counselor, and I'm not in the Department of War or Defense, but I do a lot of, as you do, pro bono counsel, um, because I'm proverbially behind the curtain. So the first thing I tell men and women who are transitioning, who have an interest in pursuing higher education, is begin with the end in mind, meaning, what are you trying to accomplish, right? And making sure, and once you determine that, making sure that the institutions you're thinking of going to can deliver that outcome for you, right? So I'll give you an example from our program. It's half an MBA, no specialization, like I said earlier. If I say to a potential applicant, hey, what do you want to do? And he or she says, I want to be an investment banker on Wall Street. I say, hey, ceasefire, freeze. Let me introduce you to the full-time MBA team. That path is well worn, and it goes through a full-time program with an internship. You can do it through another mechanism, but it's much harder, right? So whatever the degree, whatever the institution, I would counsel your listeners to begin with the end in mind and make sure whatever outcomes they seek can be delivered, right?
Well, that sounds like good U.S. Army planning advice,
That's exactly
right?
what it is.
So,
And then the other thing, Jim, I got to add the second point, which is, Emory's a well-regarded university, as many people are well aware. And we get some amount of men and women who have what's commonly known as imposter syndrome. Hey, I don't come from a place where places like Emory were ever talked about. And what I tell them, and that applies to me where I grew up. But what I tell them is don't self-select. Make us tell you no. Don't self-select out of the program.
Yeah, a lot
You
of people
know,
just say, well, I'd never get in there, or I'm not
right.
smart enough, or I'm
And
not,
they're wrong.
yeah, I
You
don't have
know,
the financial resources. A lot that's what you mean by don't
yeah,
deselect places just because of that.
right.
Yeah, that's probably really good advice right there because it's easy to lack that confidence.
Exactly. I mean, what do you have to lose? Most places will waive the application fee for veterans anyway. You know,
Let me ask you about as you look at the program. You've been there a year. It's been around for a while. It's got a great reputation. Where do you see this going, both at Emory and with our fluctuating veteran population?
yeah. So I'm still kind of formulating the answer to that question. I've visited probably a baker's dozen now of similar institutions that have been doing veterans right for many, many years. Syracuse, of course, being one of the most prominent. Um, and our team is in the process of kind of back to the military background, right? Is laying out a couple of different choices for the leadership to say, hey, do you want, the top tier plan, the middle tier plan, or just keep doing what we're doing? Um, I did have one gentleman say to me, donor, he said, Matt, I want Emory to be the beacon on the hill in the Southeast for veterans. And I found that statement to be very powerful and be inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, we have a
And,
huge veteran population around this geographic area, well beyond Georgia, but Georgia has its own good stats. So,
certainly, and again, a lot of particularly a 40-year-old average student going on into the master's program. There's a certain geographic limitation, right?
sure, yeah,
I'm not coming from Washington maybe because I got family and roots and other things tying me down to the Pacific Northwest.
right,
So
right,
that sort of being the place in the southeast makes a lot of sense as you describe it. So
yeah.
um, and
I
how
got to tell you a funny story though. So I was talking to one applicant who's going to join us here shortly in this next academic year, and this was a couple months back, and he's a SEAL, and he's in Colorado, and I'm like, well, why are you talking to us? You could just as easily get from Denver to LA and go to USC. It'd be a lot quicker. And he goes, "Oh man, they got too many SEALs down there at the program in LA. I want to come be with some Army guys." So,
There you go. There you go. Well, and again, there's a little. Everybody's got sort of like their own. They add their own spice to the gumbo, right?
absolutely,
So it's
yeah,
good to have that kind of diversification in student graduate student population in
yeah,
particular.
very much so.
They bring a lot to it. Well,
Yeah,
uh, General Matt Smith retired. More importantly, Executive Director of Veterans Initiative at Emory University. If somebody's interested in learning more about the programs that you have available for veterans, where should they go?
they could just start with emory.business.edu, or maybe I got it backwards, business.emory.edu.
And I'll tell
Um,
them that if they want to get another place you can go is emoryveterans.org/business, which
yeah,
is where I'm looking at the moment. So
yeah.
that's the only reason I
And
got it right.
if you Google or chat, AI, just master of business for veterans, there's only two, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. So, you'll either get us or USC.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you having some time with Veterans Radio today. We had a little It took us a couple, maybe it's months, but at least weeks to get this arranged at my end, and then your busy travel schedule as well. You've only been out of wearing the uniform for about a year, and but you're still hard charging on it. You don't know any better, do you?
I can't. Old habits die hard, as the saying is.
Well, I really do appreciate the time that you've given us today on Veterans Radio.
Thanks for the opportunity, Jim, and thanks again for what you're doing.
And I want to thank everybody for listening to Veterans Radio today. I am Jim Fausone. It's been a pleasure to be your host. I'm a veterans disability lawyer at Legal Help for Veterans, and you can reach us at 800-693-4800 or legalhelpforveterans.com on the web. You can follow Veterans Radio on Facebook and listen to its podcasts and internet radio shows by visiting us at veteransradio.org. That's veteransradio.org. We again want to thank our national sponsors, the National Veterans Business Development Council, nvbdc.org, Legal Help for Veterans, a veterans disability law firm with a national practice before the VA. Can help you on your claims and your appeals. It can be reached at legalhelpforveterans.com or 1-800-693-4800. We also want to thank our local sponsors. This would include the Charles S. Kettles chapter of the Vietnam Veterans of America, that's chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara Post 423, the American Legion Irwin Preskin Post 46 in Ann Arbor as well, the VA Ann Arbor Healthcare System, and certainly the National Vietnam Veterans of America Association. You can be a sponsor by going to veteransradio.org, clicking on the About Us and our sponsors, and help us out. Keep this program alive for the 21 and 22 years. Keep us going for another 20. Thank you.